Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations 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 across time.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time. I am Vivian Crawford, your host for the program that takes you to an intimate conversation between historical figures from different time periods. With us tonight we have, seated to my immediate right is, of course, my co-host who's always here, and that is Babette Josephs, former Pennsylvania State Representative. Welcome, Babette.
Thank you.
Seated next to Babette is former Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. Seated next to Secretary Dulles is Signor Machiavelli. Mr. Machiavelli is visiting us from a different time period, and we are interested to hear what he has to say about politics. Seated at my far right is the 35th President of the United States, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Welcome, President Eisenhower.
Thank you.
Now, the conversation today is, we're going to talk about what's going on in the Middle East, and so we'll start at a point in which you, President Eisenhower, are intimately involved. So I'll throw this question out and we'll see what kind of response we get to it. After World War II, the United States became deeply involved in the Middle East. So my first question is, why? And any one of you is free to jump in and tell me why you think that happened.
Well, because they had oil and gas, and that's what we wanted. So we thought we should just control that whole area.
I beg to differ, Ms. Josephs. The reason we intervened in the Middle East, in particular Iran, was that there was terrible instability due to the incompetence and corruption and fanaticism of the regime of Mohammad Mossadegh.
You just didn't like him, that's all.
We did not support him because we understood the tendencies of his regime and the possibility that might fall into the orbit of the Soviet Union.
Yes, you were scared to death of the Soviet Union.
It is a scary regime, Ms. Josephs, because we proposed an alternative to the Soviet Union as a supporter of democratic principles and freedom for all the nations.
So as a supporter of democratic principles, you overthrew the CIA, you personally and your brother, overthrew a democratically elected leader of a country, Iran.
May I want to just, because our audience may not be aware of this. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State under the Eisenhower administration, and his brother, Allen Dulles, was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So one can be somewhat suspicious as to foreign policy during the Eisenhower administration because these two brothers had their own agenda. So I agree with you, Representative Josephs. I want to ask Mr. Dulles this, and that is, you were talking about the regime in Iran being unstable, not democratic. However, wasn't Mr. Mossadegh elected by the people of Iran?
Yes, you must understand the people of Iran were not very well educated and rather backward in their culture.
Now,
we did not believe.
Wait a minute. They weren't all rich white men, you mean?
That's not the point, Ms. Josephs. We were supporting the Shah of
Mr.
Iran.
Secretary,
Yes,
you just address me as representative, please.
if you wish.
Thank you.
Now, Representative Josephs, my point is there were forces in Iran, such as the so-called Tudeh Party, which was heavily influenced by the Communist Party, which was supporting the Soviet Union, that if we did not intervene, Iran could have fallen into the orbit of the Soviet Union, and thus valuable oil resources would have been lost to the free world.
Yeah, there you go.
During that period of time, wasn't the Soviet Union an ally of the United States?
The operative word, Senor, was. They were no longer. They were posing a threat to freedom-loving peoples throughout the world. It was the purpose of the policy of the United States to support all freedom persons of combating the possible tyranny of communist regimes throughout the world. That was always our state policy. It remains so.
You're juxtaposing liberty against communism. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a novel conception.
And what did the president think of all of
what the
this?
president thought. What President
First of
Eisenhower?
all, there were several reasons. Number one, there was an extreme power vacuum. Number two, British Petroleum, who forced our hand through the United Kingdom's government to intercede on their behalf. We took their chestnuts out of the fire. However, again, going back to the power vacuum, it was going to be us or the Russians. And because the Russians had already appeared antagonistic toward us toward the end of World War II, we decided we better go in and establish a presence.
That was a false dichotomy. I don't think Mossadegh was interested in handing its country over to either one of us.
It doesn't
And
matter.
he was elected as a Democratic leader, and we just assassinated him, basically.
He was a Democratic leader without clothes.
Without what?
Clothes. He had no power structure.
Could say the same thing about you, Mr. President, with all due respect.
Yeah, but I had Mr. Dulles on my team.
That's true.
Yes.
And he had no scruples whatsoever.
I think what we need to be clear about, you had Mr. Dulles on your team, is your evaluation of it. But President Eisenhower, there would be some of us who may think that Mr. Dulles had you on his team. And the reason for that is that Mr. Dulles, your Secretary of State, was heavily invested in oil. I mean, every place that he had investments in, there ended up being problems. He was invested in United Fruit Company. We all know what happened in South America and Central America with United Fruit, and he was invested in oil. So
the very idea that I would use the functions of the United States government to further my private profit is totally ridiculous.
It is
It
not.
makes all kinds of sense to me, and it explains all your motives to me.
Representative Josephs to a left liberal such as yourself. However,
A thinking human being, perhaps.
Yes, if you would consider the stability of the government, the stability of the world depends on the strength and power of the United States to counteract the intrusions into unstable countries that the Soviet Union would have posed. And that was the situation we faced in Iran.
Are you suggesting that if the United States had not intervened in that particular conflict, that the Soviet Union would have?
Yes,
Absolutely.
precisely, Senor.
Well, that's a plausible enough supposition, but that does nothing to justify the position that you're taking regarding their backwardness. Or it seems that you're wasting time trying to justify something that doesn't need to be justified.
What do you mean by that, Senor?
Well, in order to maintain stability, the United States had to maintain its allegiances with Great Britain. No one argues that. Further, in order for Great Britain to maintain what little power it had after all of the damage that it took from World War II, Great Britain absolutely needed to attempt to maintain power over world oil reserves. So in reality, there is no way that the United States could have gone without intervening in order to protect its own interests, given that Great Britain is clearly the United States and has been throughout its history, except for
The
a few
revolution.
unfortunate
Right.
incidents many centuries hence.
Around
Except for those
1776, right.
and 1812. But,
That one too.
But that's neither here nor there.
Exactly.
We're talking about many, many years ago. There was no way that the United States could have protected its own interest without intervening.
But in
So
the
you're
end,
trying to-
the whole world hates us, and how does that help our interests?
Well,
That doesn't matter what the rest of the world feels about us. The primary interest of the United States government is to maintain its own power and stability and influence.
Yeah, but-
And to do that, we need to maintain allies in certain strategically important nations, such as the Shah was an ally of the United
The
States.
Shah wasn't an ally. The Shah
Oh.
was a puppet.
A puppet of
Well,
who?
wait, let's be fair.
Our puppet.
We're making perhaps an unnecessarily strong distinction between the two. In reality, anytime there's an allegiance between two people or two nations, one is in a greater position of power at any given moment.
Yes.
So when one is in a position of greater power, the other functions by turns as a puppet, as a toady, as a errand boy. There are so many different functions that can happen within any allegiance. To call one leader ostensibly or in actual fact a puppet is just, it's a gross
Well,
oversimplification.
wasn't
Well,
the president?
First of all, again, it goes back to one, power is an acquired taste. That's number one. Number two, it still
Quickly
boils
acquired,
down,
I think we can agree, quickly acquired.
right, but it also boils down, there's only one simple solution during my time and during the times hereafter until the present time. It's all about oil, which means money, which means power.
And status.
And
But
it's-
why
that's
are we
what we're
looking
faced
for the
with.
simple
We
solution?
are faced with
Why
it.
do we look
with-
for a
with-
hard solution?
What are we trying to solve?
We're
Well,
trying.
let's set some background. President Eisenhower, you would agree that during the time that Mr. Mossadegh was elected as the president of Iran, the Iranian people were suffering. There was poverty. They lived in shanties. The way that they lived was deplorable. And the assets, their primary asset is oil. And that oil was taken by British Petroleum
Absolutely right.
to no benefit to the people who lived in Iran. So what I'd like to do is I'd like some answer as to how this comports with what it is that the United States is supposed to represent. Not what it really is, but what we the people believe that it represented. And we're going to take a break, and I will come back to you, and I'd like an answer to that, because I'm not comfortable with the fact that just because we can do something, we do it. So when we come back after this break, I would like to hear from you gentlemen, and I'd also like to know, Mr. Secretary Dulles, as to at what point did you decide to follow the treatise of Mr. Signor Machiavelli, because that's exactly what you and your brother did. You used it as a playbook. So we'll come back and we'll get some answers to these questions. Thank you. Welcome back. Now, when we left President Eisenhower, I posed the question to you as to the difference between what this country is supposed to stand for and the positions that were taken vis-a-vis the Middle East during your presidency.
Well, if we're speaking about today, I think the positions we've been taking since my term in office have been one of convenience,
Could I
not
just
of strength.
understand the question that you asked as a foreigner? I'm not exactly sure. What principles exactly are you saying the United States is supposed to represent?
Freedom.
Well, they tell us when you're in school that we represent freedom, independence, fair play, care
Democracy.
for our fellow citizens, care about the world and the world's citizens. And that's what kids learn, and some people absorb that and keep on thinking we ought to go there.
Are those not the same principles that every civilization has espoused
I don't
in the
know.
last 1,000 years?
I don't know.
I doubt it.
I doubt it
Well,
myself.
whether they actually live up to them is
Well, that's the
entirely
important part.
consideration, but they certainly have the decency to espouse the
I doubt
principles.
that.
Yes, but civilizations are maintained by force, and that is how states have been maintained since time immemorial, by the use of force. And whether you and how you use force is very important. You have to, and all this fine talk about fair play might sound very good, but that's not how the world works, Representative Joseph.
That's
It's
not how
ruled
the
by
world
force.
worked after you and your brother had a chance, had at it to run things. It certainly didn't. I mean, the end of fair play started specifically, Mr. President, during your presidency, while these two brothers were wreaking havoc in the world.
I mean,
So
didn't
If
we
you
get
maintain force, if you have the power to impose your will, you must be willing to use it. And we had to use it in Iran to maintain the stability of
wait.
the country so as to prevent a Soviet takeover.
Mr. President,
But we didn't,
you-
excuse me, we didn't make it better. And that's the problem.
We didn't make it
We
better.
did not make it
We
better.
made it worse.
We can
And-
agree that we didn't make it
Right.
better.
And that's been the philosophy, frankly, of all our engagements from my term until now, till the present
before.
time. And that's been our problem. We don't have a set policy that's written in stone that speaks to our goodness. And our,
No, and,
you know,
and we just
that's-
look terrible every place, and
and
everybody
be-
hates
And we also
us.
flaunt our wealth. The ugly American still is around,
Yes.
unfortunately. And we're just not getting better.
But did you know what these guys were up to?
Well, I really didn't. I wouldn't have appointed them. But at the time, I was in too deep already. And I couldn't get out because the Republican Party, not only I, but them, wanted them. And they were a package deal. Alan Foster, for my money, after my term of office, should have been
Alan
arrested
Dulles.
and tried for treason.
Alan Dulles.
Yes, Alan Dulles, yes.
And would you, I want you to explain that, because I don't think that our audience knows that, and it's important that that come out.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that both Dulleses had their own agenda. And I was peripheral at the time with that agenda. They talked around me, above me, and under me, and behind my back. So I didn't know everything that was transpiring. But Alan Dulles wanted to become the world's richest man in the quickest time. And he almost succeeded, by the way. But he also cost us human lives. Now, the one thing that John did was keep threatening that we were going to use the H-bomb on Russia,
well,
on
generally
their
speaking,
airports.
the threat of force is more useful.
Right, the use of
Absolutely.
threat that he used and I followed up with kept us out of war. That's the one thing that Dulles did. The problem we had is we lacked human intelligence on the ground so that we could know what was going on where.
We
didn't
still
get
don't.
all of our information from U2s because we couldn't. And that handicapped us considerably.
We still don't know what's going on the ground.
I-
most
Well, I'm not
places.
president now.
I
it's
think
not
we're
your
being
fault.
terribly uncharitable to the president. In reality, every president has some version of the exact same problem.
That's right.
The American populace fancies itself the most free and fair and honest and upright country in the world. In reality, the citizenry of the United States is not so different from the citizenry of any other country.
I agree.
Well, given that information, it seems unfair to expect any president to successfully navigate morality while attempting to keep a country full of people, most of whom are civilians, alive.
Well, you have to
It's
understand.
not easy, but that's why they're presidents.
You have to understand, Senor and Mr. President and Representative Josephs, that the citizenry of the United States, on average, does not have the intellectual, how you say, equipment or understanding of the world.
Oh, just like
As
the
a-
Iranians.
As a man of my class and of my understanding would have, who has toured the world and met with the leaders of these countries, and I and men such as myself, like my brother Alan, do have this understanding of the world.
You're superior to the rest of us. We give you that, all right?
I
Now,
won't.
that's an interesting point, because you said the same thing about Iran.
That's right, exactly.
That's why we got involved in Iran. And
To save them
because
from
their newly
themselves.
democratically elected president was to save them from themselves. That's exactly right. And so now we hear
It's
this
a
about the
compelling
citizen-
argument, isn't it?
If you're a ruler, if you're a member of the elite, the Northeast elite.
If you're part of the rich, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, well, I am of a class that has toured the world and administered large corporations and has run the foreign ministries of several.
Bully for you.
And we do have this understanding of the world, and I believe that as long as I believe the populace should trust us with the administration of the foreign policy,
no.
so as to maintain its stability
way.
in this country and in Iran. And in Iran, we found a man such as General Zahedi, a military man who does understand the necessities, to understand the world as we do.
Now, I want to, because you're talking about a military man and understanding the necessities of running the world.
You got a military man as the
And you
president.
had a president that was a military man. So
I'd like-
I'm trying to understand how you and your brother rationalize for actually starting a coup in Iran, deposing that president, and propping up the Shah.
But you're suggesting that a coup needs to be rationalized, which is a misleading statement. The purpose of a coup is to obtain power.
Seize power.
There's no justification. One doesn't need to justify the desire for power. The power is its own reward. And as much as my little treatise has been maligned for some of the tactics it contains, ultimately, the only point of any of these tactics is to create and sustain stability, which ultimately is the most peaceful way of maintaining order.
So do we have a stable world?
But that doesn't,
Now?
that's
Today?
not reality.
Come on.
And that's the biggest problem,
What's
because
not
what you
reality?
do is you're creating vacuums across the world that have to be filled by us or the Russians or
the
whoever.
Chinese.
And now in
That's
Europe,
exactly real. You create vacuums and then fill them,
Yeah,
presumably with yourself.
but we can't. We can't be everything to everyone, and that's our problem. It's cost us in the last 50 years an enormous price in dollars and in human life, with all the places we've
So
tried
why
to
did
go.
you go
And we
along
haven't,
with it for
because-
this whole time, Mr.
Well,
Eisenhower?
I have to tell you that I was pulled into it.
Well, you were a reluctant president.
I was. I didn't want to be president to begin with. I must tell you, I didn't feel well from the first day at West Point until I retired. I was sick, and I mean, at times I was very sick. Do you know? I'm actually going to say this against me, is I took more vacations because of illness than any single president in our history.
More than George W.?
More than George W.
Oh, my.
More than any single president. And that I played golf, 3 holes of golf, every single night of my life as a
goodness.
president.
Well, 3 holes isn't that many.
No, but it's enough to make your stomach curl because I took it very seriously. And if I missed a putt, I went nuts. And I mean, it was my fault, and I realized.
But if you overthrew a country, you didn't become nuts, right?
That we missed a few putts in the world.
Yeah.
And that's what the problem is. We weren't there to face the music, and we weren't dancing with everyone. So that was my problem, and yours, John. And we just couldn't get it across to everybody.
Did you ever get the sense, Mr. President, that while you were in office, that the Dulles brothers together thought themselves the actual ruler of the United States, the actual political leader of the United States, because of the kinds of things that they did that I don't think you were aware of? I think that's what caused you to make that speech that we all remember and we all study in terms of warning us about what could possibly happen when men like Mr. Dulles and his brother were in charge.
Let's be fair.
Okay.
Now, we are all aware of the differences in the roles that people play in organizations. There is a hierarchy in every organization, whether it's acknowledged or not. In a government, there are statesmen, and there are generals, there are soldiers, and there are civilians. The president's background is as a soldier before he was ever a statesman. And the Dulles brothers, their background is as statesmen, and they were never military men, even though one of them at least attempted to get into the military. This is all rather self-evident as to why it happened. President's job is to be an executive, but a general's job is to carry out executive orders. That was the president's skill set.
Yes, yes. The president entrusted me and my brother Alan to our several agencies to conduct them as best we knew how, and I have no regrets for anything I have done. And I can speak for my brother Alan when he has no regrets either for his role.
Well, I don't
that's
imagine
clear.
you would. I don't imagine that you would.
It's clear.
Because it was a financial benefit to you.
Yeah,
and
you
your brother.
became
I mean,
very rich
You became very rich men.
by treating our president the way you treated Mossadegh. But you didn't have to overthrow him, though, because he didn't know what you were doing.
But we were already overthrown.
Exactly.
From within.
From within.
And what we will do is when the next time that we get together, because this has been a very interesting conversation, when we get together, I would like to have the opportunity to ask you, Mr. Dulles, if you have any regrets. You say you have no regrets, but when you look at the Middle East as it stands today, and you look at what's going on, I want you to address the state of Israel, and I also want you to address the fact that Iran is now a loose cannon, and maybe, or perhaps if you and your brother had not engineered that coup, we would not be facing the threat of Iran becoming nuclear and what that means to the entire world. Because it's not just going to be the Middle East, it's going to affect the entire world. So I want you to think about that and come back again, and we will have that discussion. So please, think about it, come back, and Mr. Machiavelli, Senor Machiavelli, I want you to give us some information in terms of how you feel about how your little treatise, as you call it, has been interpreted by men such as Mr. Dulles and his brother. Thank you so much, and we look forward to getting together to finish this conversation. As it always happens, we get involved in something that's very interesting, and we have to stop. But we will come back to you next week, and hopefully we will have some answers to these questions. Good night.
Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations across time. Conversations